one. So that's my warning. Well, we're going to start it off with reading about honesty. Living in denial is living dishonestly. How many times have we lied to ourselves and others saying, I can stop anytime I want to, or I have the right to choose how I live my own life. I just want to do what I want to do. My behavior doesn't affect anyone but me. Ironically, as we assert our freedom to live as we choose, we soon lose the freedom to choose anything other than our own dependencies. We become enslaved to it. Jesus said some people who believed in him, Jesus said to some people who believed in him, you are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teaching, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I tell you the truth. Everyone who sins is a slave of sin. A slave is not a permanent member of the family, but a son is part of the family forever. So if the Son sets you free, you are truly free. Why can't you understand what I'm saying? It's because you can't even hear me, for you are the children of your father, the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. The spiritual forces that sway our life have roots in either truth or deceit. Truth leads to freedom. Deceit leads to bondage and death. Denial is a lie that keeps us in slavery. When we are a slave to our addiction, we lose the right to choose any other way of life. It is only when we break the cycle of denial, when we become brutally honest about our bondage, that there is any chance for real freedom. And of course, we can apply that to not just the addiction itself, but all of our dysfunctional behaviors and our wrong thinking, just all the defects that we talk about, our insecurities and our inadequacies and our irresponsibilities and our immaturities. So tonight's topic, common personality traits of failure to launch. And so it's really kind of part two of what we started last week. And it's pretty long. I wanted to take my time through it, but I don't want to turn this into a 2-hour group. So we may just make it 2 parts, because we need to really spend some time on some of these, because one of the biggest things that we deal with, that we see, that we've lived, is getting families on the same page with the therapy. And so I'm going to go through these traits, because it starts with this understanding that as addicts, as dysfunctional thinkers, as dysfunctional behaviors, we learn how to manipulate all things. We, the addict, we learn how to manipulate all things. And like we talked about last week in failure to launch, or Peter Pan syndrome, the boy who never wants to grow up. Well, how do we maintain staying 12 at 40 or 50 or whatever? How do we do that? Well, we learn how to take what is in front of us, and we learn how to manipulate it, and twist it, and move it around, and convince people of things. And if we can get other people to think, and I'm not going to give it away, we'll go through these bullet points. If we can get other people to think that our failure to launch is beyond our control, then we get treated as a sick person. And I'm not saying addiction isn't a sickness. I'm saying the solution requires accountability and responsibility. And we all possess that ability. Like the big book, the AA big book talks about, the only people who don't ever change anything are the ones who can't get honest with themselves. And so what we were just reading, denial is about dishonesty. So, like I say, this is probably going to be uncomfortable for some people, and that's good, because we need to start pricking those reality areas. And when the patient gets honest and open and recognizes man, I got to do some things different. I got to learn how to do things different, because if I knew what to do different, I would have already fixed myself. So I need to be willing to look at myself and make changes, learn how to make changes. And as family members, we need to do the exact same thing. You guys have heard me talk about the identified patient syndrome. It's the most dangerous thing for the patient. But families adapt that or adopt that thinking. Family members, friends, anybody who has been caught up in the storm and the chaos of an addict or an addiction cycle, it's so easy to think, well, the addict is the identified patient, so if they would just get better, whatever that looks like, then everyone else could have a normal life. Not recognizing all the dynamics that go into play. The families who, the whole families who become transformed with a completely different dynamic are the ones who recognize, man, we've all got a role to play. We've all got some things we need to look at in ourselves. Families who stay stuck in the identified patient syndrome, the patient can still get better, but it makes it that much more difficult because the enabling behaviors, the rescuing behaviors, the rushing to the rescue to absorb consequence behaviors can still be present. And I'll tell you, like on a really simple thing, I'll tell one of my little stories. When I was my first year in recovery, my mom, of course, was my big enabler, my rescuer, my problem solver, my maid and my taxi driver and my ATM. And when I started taking ownership of my life and myself and my early recovery, it became very important to me, even if that meant I had to go without, which it did mean that. I was going to have to go without some things. I was going to have to earn some things. I was going to have to delay gratification about some things. But I'd made a decision. I was willing to do that. And in order to do that, I had to learn how to tell my mom no, because she still had all those behaviors. And it was easy for her to think, well, he's doing so good now. I just want to swoop in and make everything better faster. And so she would try to give me money. She would try to pay a bill. And she knew we were struggling. Let me help you with this. Let me help you with some gas. Let me help you with, and when I started telling her no, she would actually get upset. She couldn't fathom why I was telling her no, because I'd always told her yes. And it was a weird dynamic. That's when I really first started recognizing that. And she would get upset with me and even storm off a couple of times. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. How are you going to get around if I'm not helping you with gas money? You don't have any other prospects right now. And she had all these very valid reasons to help me, but I had a stronger reason to say no. And that was, I was ready to grow up at all cost. Whatever, the big book says, we've got to be willing to go to any length necessary. And tonight isn't about my story, but that's an example of the challenges that many of us face in early recovery. That's why we stress the family dynamic so much. When families change, everybody gets a different life. When families resist and stay stuck in the identified patient syndrome, the addict still has a chance to get better, but it doesn't change the family dynamic. So, there's even strategies that we would recommend in situations like that. I'll save that for another topic. So let's get into these first points, and I forget how many of them there are. I'm used to working on my cheat sheet, the board, but now I've only got one piece of paper at a time. But remember what we're talking about. We're talking about the common personality traits of a failure to launch, or an adult who's afraid to grow up. And I know this one very, very well because I was him. Behaviors intended to avoid responsibility. We implement all sorts of behaviors to avoid responsibility. And remember that, because that's very key for families in determining, is this a real situation? Is this a real crisis? Or am I avoiding something? Or is the patient avoiding something? Because there's always a common theme. The second point is in our fear of growing up, we literally spend more time and energy developing escape behaviors than it would take to simply function as an adult, which is insane. It's like that, we kind of talk about this a lot. We will spend more time trying to get out of something than just accomplishing it. I don't want to, whatever it is, take out the trash. I don't want to take out the trash. We'll do this and we'll do that and we'll avoid this and we'll avoid that, when taking out the trash would have taken 3 minutes. And you hear that when you're a kid, right? When we're exhibiting these behaviors as a child, there's always some adult around saying, you could have already been done with that by now. You could have already finished that task. So what is it in the addict brain? And I got some really cool brain stuff coming up. So there's an answer to this question. What is it about the addict brain that we are willing to spend more time doing other things apart from responsibility? It's almost like it's tainted, like responsibility is tainted or something. Well, with responsibility comes expectation, comes accountability, and that's the overall fear. It's like, I don't want to look too proficient because then I'm going to get a whole bunch of other stuff expected of me. And so to avoid all of that, in fact, we're getting to that, it's called weaponized incompetence. So we learn how to weaponize our own incompetence, which isn't real. That's the kicker. It's not really incompetent, but we are manipulating that. Third point, all of this, all failure to launch is rooted in trauma, low self-image, and with the assistance of family enabling behaviors. That's not the cause, that's just what can keep it going for a while. We're going to get into some pretty, we're going to get to if we've spent time up to this point talking about personality defects on one end of the spectrum, maybe to the middle, tonight we're going to go to the other extreme. So don't be quick, because some of these sound unbelievably harsh. Don't be quick to reject it. Like we were talking about last night in group, there's always varying degrees. Own, though, what you recognize. Be honest with yourself. Be willing to be honest with yourself about it, because that's the only way any of us get better. Which leads me to number 4. The greater the manipulative avoidance behaviors, the deeper underlying issues there are. See number 3. So the greater the manipulative avoidance behaviors are, the more trauma that person has, the more low self-image that person has, and oftentimes the more family enabling behaviors they have. And so we can just get stuck in this cycle, and it doesn't matter, even though as the patient, we may only exhibit, let's put a visual to this, we'll think of like percentages. One patient may only exhibit 10% of the dramatics of this, and then another person might exhibit 90% of the dramatics of this, but it doesn't really matter because it results in the same dysfunctional cycle where the addict is doing what they're doing and the family is chasing us around trying to fix and solve and absorb all the wreckage of our past, the wake of wreckage that we leave behind. And so, and then the fifth one, and I think this is the last point. Yeah, the fifth one, it feels safer to avoid adulting because there's no responsibilities, no expectations from others, and we can hide away in fantasy world. We were talking about, this is the danger of like anything that allows us to escape. So maybe we're going through periods where we're not using, but we can't get off the video machine or whatever, the video gaming. It really makes me sound old. Or the phone, or this, the scrolling, and we're just, it's all escapism. And just normal people can get caught up in that. But like adult people will say, more maturity can recognize it and redirect and go, oh man, because you feel something, right? You're feeling, oh man, I'm not being very productive and I need to get back to being productive. Well, a child doesn't see that. Remember, 95% of a child's day is spent doing what they want to do. But an adult's day is 95% doing what they need to do. And so there's a gauge, there's like a built-in gauge that we can recognize, and we notice it. Well, that's not present. So avoiding feels a lot safer, and those expectations are everything. But in order to do this, it requires, in order for us to stay escaped, it requires someone else to fund the lifestyle. And that becomes an expectation, right? I mean, I'll just use myself as an example. If my mom or my grandfather is paying the rent, paying the car, paying the bills, paying, it doesn't matter what I'm doing for a living. I can spend my money however I want to spend my money, because someone else is going to take care of my ability to exist. Well, that's a pretty sweet deal if you can get it. And the reality is in failure to launch, we're absolutely getting it. You know, remember, a child just wants to have fun all day. And so we can manipulate these things to ensure that. But here's the kicker, and this is what we stress the most. When the lifestyle funding stops, the failure to launch the patient has no choice but to change or take their chances on the streets. And some people do that. Some people will choose the streets. Of course, it doesn't end well, but that's how great that fear of adulting can be. You know, and like our families are sitting back going, what? Are you kidding me? You can go to college, you can do this. If you were just get back to work for a year, we were gonna help you do this and start your business or whatever. You know, there's all this opportunity abounds. But the fear of living up to that is so overwhelming that oftentimes we will actually choose the streets. Now we're not believing that that's what we're choosing, but that's where it ends. We're thinking, no, I'll be okay because I'm gonna call Billy Bob, and he told me I could go stay at his place anytime. And so we may take advantage of that, but Billy Bob didn't really mean anytime forever. He meant for a couple hours. And so then we get kicked out of Billy Bob's, and then we go to this other place, and then we find a relationship that'll take care of us, and then it just becomes this endless cycle, and our families are left confused. What in the world? It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense until you take into account all of this is rooted in trauma, which leaves a very low sense of self. And so remember, all of these avoidance behaviors are about feeling safer. That's not what's happening, but that's what it feels like to the patient. I'll save the trauma just to save time. We'll do the whole trauma thing soon. Okay, so here's common features, and of course we talked about some of these last week. But common features always present in a failure to launch situation: over-reliance on family support or others' support. And that's not just financial. That can be attention. That can be validation. That can be, whatever, a soda pop here and there. It could be anything that reassures the patient that I'm loved. But that's not what's actually happening. But that's the sickness of this dysfunctional dynamic, is things and attention get equated with love, but it's actually emotional rescuing. So I don't have to learn how to manage my own emotions or my own situation if I can just, be a victim, be helpless, need something, rely on something else. And if I have one person in the world that will respond to that, then I don't have to change. Because I can always call I can always call Uncle Bob, and he'll do it for me. He'll get me that thing. He'll bring me the bag of chips. He'll get me that thing. And so that's why, in order to impact real change, there just has to be this division, a hard one. And the patient doesn't always respond well to that. And of course we wouldn't respond well to that. We've been hearing yes our whole lives. So it takes time. So common features. The second one is a history of productivity and achievement. Wait, what? over-reliance on family support and a history of productivity and achievement, those don't seem to go together. But they actually go very well together, and they're all common features. So what's going on with that? If our behavior is so bad today, how in the world do we have a history of productivity or achievement? In the past, any achievements or productivity were things we wanted to do, and we hadn't begun the brain rewiring process that addiction does yet. So we were capable of doing some things well some of the time, but it wasn't enough to solidify a foundation. That's why when drugs, alcohol, avoidant behaviors became, we recognized those were viable options, we went with that. That's what got solidified. And then the third one is mental illness, emotional distress. Substance abuse is a mental illness. You don't have to be diagnosed with some clinical mental illness to have mental illness, right? And we can all have mental health days, and we all need to take a break. And before the researchers and the clinicians got involved, those were times we just took a week off and went camping. Those were times when we just went and played around at golf, right? We took a mental health day, we just didn't call it that. But the emotional distress is always present as well. So when these two things aren't responded to well, then they just get worse and worse and worse. And then the development of manipulating aspects of mental illness, and I'll read it a couple times. The development of manipulating aspects of mental illness to appear worse than it is to avoid responsibility. And these are the behaviors like the pity, self-pity, victimhood, and I put a little notation in here. As families are considering, well, once you get past your initial shock and you're considering, okay, wait a minute, so what, is this real? Is this really part of our family dynamic? Well, here's what you want to look for. Check the timing and the symptoms. We never, and I'll wait because we're getting to some serious details. The patient never manipulates pity, self-pity, victimhood, tummy ache, whatever, when we're doing something fun. When we're doing what we want to do, we never seem to get a headache. Check the timing and the symptoms, and you'll recognize it's a manipulation. Does that mean the patient can't have headaches? No. Can't have a stomach ache? No. But adults work through that stuff. That's the difference. In failure to launch, that becomes the reason to avoid, the excuse to avoid. And if our family members follow that, succumb to that, make that the primary issue in that moment or that situation, well, that just reinforces what we already knew. That if I play dumb, act sick, whatever, then I don't have to do anything. There's a programming involved here, and families have such a critical, important role in helping us reprogram, and that's all it is. That's how we got to think about it. It's just a programming. The number one goal, I probably should have put this first, the number one goal of the patient is to avoid responsibility. That's the number one thing. Well, of course, we spend an awful lot of time in these other topics talking about the whys of that. This is the how of that. How we manage to avoid responsibility. So what happens when the patient has a crisis? As families and patient, we want to look at the whole dynamic. What actually happened? What happens if I run a red light and I hit a car in the middle of the intersection? What would happen next? Well, we all understand what would happen next. You've either been in that situation or you've seen that situation, you've heard about that situation. Other people would stop their cars, they would come to help, the police would get called, etc., etc. Maybe an ambulance would come. When it comes to the failure to launch dynamic, as family members, we don't often spend a lot of time recognizing what always happens after what we do. It's all about the beginning. We want to come to the rescue. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I've got to rescue. I've got to save this situation and protect my loved one. But we don't recognize what happens next. What happens next, the minute we implement one of our manipulative avoidance or responsibility avoidance behaviors, what happens next is everybody comes running to absorb our consequences. So instead of accountability, we get rescued. You know, I say this sometimes to the guys in group. I'm not blaming parents, but it's almost like, it's exactly like we've been programmed. You know, it's our responsibility to break the programming. If you want a different life, and that's the thing, is we don't have to do it. Okay, and I'll just leave that point at that. Let's get into top manipulation tactics. Okay, this is where it's going to get fun. These are top manipulation tactics: pretending to be incompetent, or which falls into learned helplessness. Right? There's a learned helplessness, not a taught helplessness, a learned helplessness. Nobody in our family is teaching us how to be helpless. It's quite the opposite. But we learn helplessness when we perceive kind of an over caretaking. But remember, it's the individual person. My older brother didn't have the same issues I had. Why is that? We grew up in the exact same household, right? So it's not about what the family's doing. That's not the trigger. And then once we get into this crazy dysfunctional cycle, everybody's just in survival mode at that point. Everybody's following instincts to try to solve this and solve that. And that's why we're going to spend so much time on this topic, because we've got to understand what's actually happening. If we don't know the real problem, it'll never be solved. And that's why so many people spend year after year, treatment after treatment, psych ward after psych ward, jail after jail, and nothing ever changes, because the real issues don't ever get addressed. The second one, and this is the one we're going to spend so much time on, faking illness, which is what I was talking about earlier. We can fake seizures, we fake psychosis, we fake stomach aches, we fake asthma attacks, we fake whatever. And then if you have one that's like real, you cut yourself or something, and there's a lot of blood, we can use that too. Hey, that's good. And I'll tell you something interesting. When I was still in my addiction, I used to get kidney stones a lot. It was weird. In my 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I used to get a lot of kidney stones. Might have had to do with my lifestyle. And if you've never had one, it's one of the most painful things that you could ever experience. But I would feel a kidney stone coming on, and I would get excited. I would be so happy. Even though I'm buckled over and I'm in severe pain, I would get so excited, because I knew the faster I can get to the hospital, the faster they're going to give me some opioids. How sick is that? That is sick. But I tell that story to really drive home the thought process of the patient. We're not focused on right things. We're focused on instant gratification for the next 15 seconds. And if that's not happening, this is why we spend a lot of time, like I was talking about earlier, we can spend a lot of time doing nothing, avoiding one thing. Do one thing. Whatever. Fold a shirt. Put a pair of pants on your hanger, or whatever it is. And we can spend an entire day doing absolutely nothing while avoiding that. That's how frightening responsibility is to the patient. So here we are. I'm going to go down these, and I'm going to shatter some old myths and some false beliefs that families absolutely can have. We'll start with this first one: sudden illness syndrome. That's the I got a headache. Oh, I got a tummy ache. Oh, I whatever. Oh, I this thing, it just happened. I got a toenail and it's killing me and I got to go deal with that. You will never hear us say that when we're doing something that we're wanting to do. That's not mental illness, that's manipulation. Sudden illness syndrome. A sickness is only reported. Hang on. I'm going to fix my typos as we go. A sickness is only reported by the patient when required to do something they don't want to do, because it's the quickest way to avoid. I don't have to pre-plan it or premeditate it. I don't have to think in advance about it. Well, what if I get into that situation and I don't want it? These behaviors become go-to. They're instantly and always there. And it can happen at what seems like the drop of a hat. But it's programmed. It's not the drop of a hat. That's the rewiring of the brain. It's always there. It's like a file cabinet and the door is open and the I got a stomach ache file is just sitting up, kind of dog-eared, just waiting to be grabbed. And what happens next? What happens next? It's like, I always ask the guys, when we're talking about difficult situations, well, what did you think that meant? Well, here's a line that families have to start asking themselves. What happens next? What happens next is we baby the patient. We stop any kind of expectation of that person and we go, oh my God, where is the cold rag? Where's the stomach medicine? Where's the soup? Where's the whatever? And we literally get babied instead of accountability. Even though adults have to work through stomach aches, even though adults have to work through headaches or whatever, much more difficult experiences than that.
What does that mean? You get baby, but even though? So which way are we supposed to go?
What do you mean, even though?
It says even though adults are supposed to work through it.
Yeah, adults can have a headache and still keep doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But
so we're talking about the youth.
We're talking about the addict.
Okay.
Yeah, which is your role. These are behaviors you want to look at. So we get to the second one, we can fake seizures. And so I took straight out of clinical material. This is such a well-known behavioral diagnosis that to trained clinicians and therapists, it's not shocking at all because we see it all the time. But to our families, they don't know. What it does to our families is it scares the daylights out of them. And then we cater to that. There's a few of these, so I'm going to kind of go a little bit faster on here. But it's important to point these out. So a functional psychogenic seizure is an involuntary medical condition. It's caused by severe stress, trauma, psychological distress, and the brain essentially short circuits to cope with emotional pain. The person is not faking, they cannot control it, and the episode feels completely real to them. Okay, remember that term short circuit. Remember, I've used words like programming and reprogramming. So think of your computer. When it glitches, it has to reboot to get back online, or just to get it back so you can use it. I'm not talking about online internet. When we fake it, that's one of the indicators when we're faking it is there is no reboot period. It's oh my gosh, I'm having a seizure and I'll just read it. It's also called the clinical term is called malingering. It's an intentional deception where someone deliberately mimics a seizure to achieve a specific goal, such as avoiding school or work or legal trouble or to gain immediate attention, to avoid any kind of thing. And here's some differences. These are kind of interesting. Okay, so in a real seizure, this is what's happening. Make sure, there we go. In a real seizure, eye and face behavior, the person's eyes are almost always open. When we're faking seizure, we tend to like roll them backward and then like close them. But in a real seizure, and God knows we've dealt with so many seizures, man, it's rough to watch because there's a lead up to it. But anyway, the person's eyes are almost always open. They may stare blankly. They roll upward. It usually comes with some gibberish speak, or deviate strongly to one side. The person cannot blink normally or react to light. In a faked seizure episode, the person will often tightly close their eyes. If a bystander or medical professional tries to gently lift the eyelids, the person will actively resist and pull their eyelids shut. They also may cry, scream, or speak during the shaking. So if we're, they call it, it's a Hollywood reference, right? Because if we're going to pretend to do something that we've never personally experienced, we have to have some sort of reference. And so, if we've spent any time in jail or any time in a psych hospital, or we've watched enough TV or movies, then that's what we base it on. But Hollywood is not depicting the actual thing. They're depicting the dramatics of the actual thing. Okay, then there's another part of another identifier of a real seizure, and that's the pattern of movement. A true seizure follows a strict, predictable neurological sequence, and it usually begins with rigid stiffening, known as the tonic phase, followed by a highly synchronized rhythmic shaking of the arms and legs in an uncontrollable way. And then the shaking gradually slows down before stopping. In a faked episode, the movement appears disorganized, chaotic. It waxes and wanes, it stops and it starts back up. It involves thrashing, flailing, forward and back, pelvic thrusting, or alternating movements. One arm shaking while the other is still, as an example. And then there's the recovery period, which what I just described is exactly what we tend to see when we see someone in the movies have a seizure. And then there's the recovery period, because remember, we've just short-circuited the brain, or it has short-circuited us. In the recovery period, once the shaking stops, the brain needs time to reboot. The person enters a postdictal stage, leaving them profoundly confused, slurring their words, heavily breathing, or in a deep sleep for minutes to hours. In a faked seizure episode, the person often recovers almost instantly. Once the episode ends, or once their show ends, they can typically sit up, answer direct questions clearly, and engage with people right away. Okay, so why are we doing this? Because these are all behaviors that at any moment, as a patient, as a recovering addict myself who has had a long history of manipulation, if families don't recognize what's actually happening, we will never get on the same page, and our adult child will never be able to change. In psychosis, let's do the other one. In psychosis / schizophrenia, an actual psychosis is a medical state where a person loses contact with reality. It is not a sudden, dramatic Hollywood outburst, but rather a profound shift in how a person perceives the world. Okay, let me stop there for a second and kind of elaborate. Remember, in the very beginning, I'm not discounting mental illness. I'm not discounting any of these issues that may be organic, they may be legitimate. The issue is we will learn to manipulate them. I actually had asthma, and man, did I learn how to work that deal. Right? We can have any of these mental illness conditions. If we focus on one as an excuse for the other, the person will never change. If we recognize what one is and what the other is, and deal with them in appropriate ways, then the patient absolutely can change. If we stay, and it's so easy, I really want to stress this because many people we get hung up on, well, we just need a different kind of medication. Maybe that's true. Maybe we do need a different medication. But I was reading a paper the other day, and it was written by this, gosh, I don't even remember his name, but he's highly qualified mental health guy. I think he was a psychiatrist. He might have been, I don't know if he's a psychiatrist. Maybe he was just an MD who practiced psychiatry. But he said he was talking about there are medications, multiple options of medications to treat mental illness that actually work. So if a person has a long history of diagnosed clinical mental illness, along with, we'll say that same time period trying multiple medications, but the behavior is still present, it's not because of the meds. It's because of exactly what we're talking about tonight. It's because of the manipulative behaviors. It's because of the overwhelming fear of growing up. And when we can address that issue, guess what happens? All of a sudden, all these mental health issues start going down. Less meds, less this, until ultimately, I mean, I've seen so many people start this process on 20 different psych meds, and not necessarily when they were done here, but within a couple of years, they were taking maybe one. Because there's a behavioral / recovery solution for every single thing. Right? We're not still trying to figure out the brain. The researchers have figured out the brain. We know what medication works. So it's like I always kind of tease on anxiety. If you're on all kinds of anxiety meds, but you're still reporting high anxiety, guess what? Either you need to learn how to cope with anxiety behaviorally, or you're just drug seeking. It's not because the meds aren't working. Okay, so let's get into these. How do we fake psychosis? Hallucinations. We pretend to hear voices. This is what hallucination is. Hearing voices that no one else can hear is the most common sign. It can also involve seeing things, feeling sensations on the skin, or smelling odors that are not actually there. And there's a difference between that and delusions. Delusions is holding firm to the belief completely contradictory to reality. Common examples include paranoia, believing the government or a neighbor is spying on them, or something more grandiose like believing that we possess a special power. A lot of times in delusions, we can think that we're reading other people's minds, or we know someone's motive. And there's something that can go along with that I didn't even put on here, and that's kind of fixed beliefs. Disorganized speech. So in our hallucinations and delusions, we have disorganized speech, speaking in a way that is highly confusing or impossible to follow. We may switch topics rapidly with no logical connection, or use completely incoherent phrases known as word salad. And then there's disorganized or abnormal behavior, acting in ways that are bizarre or inappropriate for the situation. Right? The example we were using last night is you're in a crowded movie theater and you're going to start screaming fire. Well, this can range from wearing heavy winter coats in the middle of summer to sudden unprovoked agitation. That's what's happening. You drive around town and you always see people in the summertime wearing real heavy coats. That's true psychosis. In we'll say malingered psychosis, we're at least cognizant enough to stay cool, or to keep ourselves warm, or to take care of some basic survival needs. Okay, so here's this is where we're going to break down the difference. In an actual psychosis state, the person is having conversations with people who are not present. And these conversations can be ongoing and are external. Right? They believe that the patient believes that the people are with them in their space, not inside of them. And that's a very critical clue. Voices are outside of the head. And so in a psychotic state, we're communicating, or the patient believes they're either communicating with people in their space or they're communicating across distance. I heard every word they were saying in the neighbor's house next door. The patient truly believes that. In a real psychosis, the patient denies having conversations with voices. In faking psychosis, that's kind of the go-to thing. The patient attempts to mimic Hollywood. We pretend to be hallucinating or delusional by making an attempt at word salad, but our enunciations are clear and words are just simply put out of order. For example, the voices told me to leave, or the voices told me to go use drugs. The voices called me to the dope house, and then the elephant jumped over the fence. Right? That's not actual psychosis, that's manipulation. The ongoing practice of psychosis, the ongoing practice of faking psychosis keeps the patient free from responsibility while the rest of the family is running around trying to fix everything. The patient reports voices in their head telling them things, usually a single event or multiple singular events. Nothing is ever ongoing. We just use it as an excuse. Well, the voices told me this. The voices are scaring me. The response is usually very vague. But like I've been pushing, pay attention to what happens next. When we're malingering, we only have TV or Hollywood as a reference, and that's exactly how it gets portrayed in the movies. Okay, let's get into some of these, and I'll probably cut this off here, and we will do this part 2 because it's just too important not to do the whole thing. Okay, psychological regression. Here comes the personality traits. In a psychological regression, the stress response, the regression is known psychologically or as a psychological defense mechanism. Regression is going backwards, right? How is it that a 38-year-old grown man with a wife and 2 children and a stepchild, I'm speaking of my story, still behave in ways like a 12-year-old? Just the irresponsibility, the unwillingness to manage finances well, or even pay a bill when it's due, or always waiting for the past due, waiting until the last minute, putting things off, using my money the way I want to. What's going on with that? I got to tie this in a little bit with trauma. When we begin to have trauma impacts, this is just everybody in life, that's really when our emotional development stops. It's not when using begins, that comes second. So in a very real way, many of us are like 6-year-olds emotionally, 8-year-olds emotionally, 12 years old emotionally. And as family members, that's why you see 1 minute we're acting like a responsible adult, seemingly, but then the minute we don't get something that we want, or we're afraid that we're being held accountable for something, we start acting like a 12-year-old child. Well, that's that psychological regression. And it's easy to get there. It's automatic. The coping for that is we just return to childhood. Because what happens in childhood when we're overwhelmed with stress? Everybody else makes it better, right? We get attention. We get what we think is love. We get off the hook, and that's the goal of the grown-up. A child needs that nurturing. An adult needs accountability. And then the responsibility dodge. This is all part of the regression. Acting like a child allows us to mentally escape adult pressures. So what's one way that we can do that? Well, we can fake a seizure. Oh gosh, I've got a tummy ache. I'm having a seizure right now. The sun's so hot. I've got heat stroke. I'm hearing voices, and that think about that. If your family member is really reporting these things, that's going to scare the heck out of anybody, especially mama bears. Oh my gosh, my adult child is hearing voices. So the response from the family is organic. It's instinctual. Of course we're going to respond to that. This is the time to learn how to differentiate the manipulation from the actual problems to address. Because the patient, has learned how to manipulate that a very long time ago. Okay, the second one, and I'll end it with this. deflection and avoidance. I don't know, maybe I should do this one. Nah, this is good. Deflection and avoidance. How we evade accountability. We give nonsense answers. We say things like, dinosaurs don't wear shirts. Hey, could you go put a shirt on? Well, dinosaurs don't wear shirts. We'll shift the focus away from the serious question. And it's a control tactic. It frustrates the asker so much that they completely stop asking questions. And then once that occurs, what happens next? I just got out of whatever I was required to do. It prevents people from getting close enough to see real emotions or flaws. Okay, we've got time for this one. Weaponized incompetence. And I'll repeat these two next week. Weaponized incompetence. This is also known as strategic immaturity. We act incapable or foolish, and it keeps people from expecting anything from us. Well, think about that for a minute. So in this kind of scenario, the patient is okay with the idea that people might think less of us. Don't go to Miles, man, if you want help with anything, because that guy, he'll show up. Yeah, he'll tell you he'll show up, but that's just to get a cigarette and then he's out. We're okay with people thinking that about us in this condition. When we are using our immaturity as a strategy, when we are weaponizing our incompetence. Remember, the greater the level, some of these things may seem so dramatic for some of you guys. It is very commonplace among substance abusers. It is, and it doesn't just, it's not exclusive to addiction. There's plenty of people that aren't involved in drugs or alcohol that are exhibiting these behaviors. It's just simply failure to launch. But the greater the level, or the more dramatic this behavior can be, the greater the level of pain. And the pain is not what we say it is. The patient. The pain isn't, man, if I could just get a car. I hate having to bum rides from people. That's not the real pain. The real pain hasn't even been touched yet. And it's going to be very difficult to get to it until families and therapy get on the same page.
Try to skip it.
Yeah, that's exactly. Wouldn't that be awesome? And then the patient would never have to change, and the families can just keep funding our lifestyle. That would be awesome, because that's what we're after. That's the whole dynamic. And then the second part of that, and we'll end it, of weaponized incompetence is shifting burdens. So if they act like a child, others will step in to manage our life, chores, emotional heavy lifting. The solution is in the descriptions of all of these. Whatever we're avoiding, that's what we need to be tackling. Accountability, a sense of responsibility. We need to, as family members, we need to increase those expectations and demand them, not unrealistic. And like we talk about so much, early in recovery, they need to be pretty low and achievable, but they need to be there. Yes, we will keep supporting you, but we expect these 4 things. And it could be as simple as, like in this environment, it could be as simple as, are you making your bed every day? Are you taking a shower every day? Are you whatever? Are you doing those basic things that we know you have the capacity to do? I'm gonna skip real quick to the solution, because we got to leave every talk on the solution. And this is it. And we're gonna get. I will finish this next week. Actually, I may just do I may do something again tomorrow just to get it out there so you guys can have it. The solution for all of us is we got to face it head on. In the beginning, we read that thing on denial, and denial is just dishonesty. But until we can get honest about what's actually happening, and that's why, we spend an awful lot of time laying it out. This is what's actually happening. And man, if you're honest about it and you really look at it in an objective way, you recognize it's dead on. That's the beautiful thing about addiction and recovery. It's all predictable. It's done. It's not a maybe thing. People will tell us that it's a maybe thing because that's their excuse. They'll say, "Oh, we tried this rehab and we tried that rehab and we went to this therapist and we went to that and then we've already done all that and it doesn't work." Solving the addiction problem requires a process of change, and when families are a part of that process, which means doing things differently, then the patient stands a really good chance, 90% of getting a different life. We know the the research community, right? We've been studying the brain. I'm not a researcher, but these researchers have been studying the brain as it pertains to behavior for 100 years or more, probably much more. We get into the ancients, and the brain as it pertains to addiction for at least 30 years, maybe 40, I guess. So we got to, as family members, we got to ask ourselves, what's going on with us that we struggle or that we resist the solution? And the answer is many things, and we'll save that for the rest of them. But for example, oftentimes as family members, we've been dealing with our own sense of guilt. Maybe we look at something in the past that we feel regretful about, and we're trying to make up for it. And so what we do is we'll over-parent, or we'll over-rescue, or we'll over-enable. That's not going to get it. Families and moms and dads and uncles and brothers and sisters need to be healing also. The second part of the solution is, I've already said this one, family and therapy must be on the same page. And the third one is families must be willing to work on their part in this dynamic. Spend some time thinking about this one and rewatch this video and go slow. Keep hitting that pause button and thinking about it, and then hit start again and think more about it. This is one of the most critical topics we've ever done. And it is, let me back up. The only people who don't really make significant changes are the ones that don't believe they're dealing with a life or death situation. And that's how brutally honest we need to get about this situation. We're going to die. That's just how it ends. Jails, institutions, or death. And we don't tend to stay in jail long, and we don't tend to stay in institutions long. And so while we're choosing the streets is where we will die. We have to take it that serious. And families that do that get a completely different life. Families that stay stuck on one part of the dynamic or another, everything's always in chaos. Everything's just around the corner. The solutions aren't around the corner. The solutions are right in front of us. We just got to be willing to follow them. Just like the patients, just like I tell the guys all the time, you got to be willing to do it. Okay, so can you, whoever's closer, thanks for watching on YouTube. We really do appreciate it, and I hope you got a lot out of this one because this is super important. And look for another one. I'll probably finish this one out maybe by tomorrow. So look for another one.
Is the next button?
Yeah.